Hello, my friends, and welcome to another podcast episode. Thank you for joining me today. And I have a great pleasure to chat with Erika Chalkley, who is a somatic mentor and meditation teacher for ambitious and overextended women. Hello, Erika, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining me. And I'm really excited about us talking because I've known about you for a while and I've seen you around, in that kind of embodiment circles, that kind of stuff. And but we never actually had a chance to talk. So it's really great to have you here. And I would love to hear about your journey. Like,
Mm.
how did you end up working with women, especially, ambitious and overextended women, which I have to say, possibly I qualify into that. So I'd love to hear about your journey.
Yeah, great. And I feel the same. It's beautiful to be in the same world, and sometimes you just miss people who don't connect. So I'm really grateful as well to this
Mm.
opportunity. And yes, ambitious and overextended. Well, I just think that's me, and that's well, a huge amount of women in this current era, this current climate. So yes, so I've got my story here. It actually goes all the way back to childhood. Um, yeah, so I'll just say, yeah, I'll say a little bit. I was sitting in my garden earlier today and I just wrote out my story. And it's interesting how each time you write it, a new perspective comes on it. So
Mm.
this is my story today. Maybe if you ask me tomorrow, it might be different. But so I would say you, when I was young, I was a very sensitive and creative child. Um, and and there was a lot of pressure in my family to achieve academically. So I also remember working very hard at school, and there's a sort of A type personality there, but underneath quite a sort of creative, daydreamy sensitivity as well. Um, yeah, and I grew up in a lot of poverty. So I come from a very deprived area of the UK, like a region and particularly a neighbourhood that was very, very poor. So I had very like a consciousness of poverty. And our family, we struggled. We weren't really poor, but we weren't affluent by any standards, and we were in this neighbourhood. And and I come from a long line of on my dad's side, kind of trade unionists and kind of socialists. In fact, I recently just found out that my grandfather was once kind of during the McCarthy era in America, that sort of happened over here as well, was his house was ransacked because they thought he was a communist.
Oh, okay.
And stuff. So anyway, just to say there's this thread of kind of class consciousness in my
Mm.
history. But then in my actual nuclear family, I have my mum who is a good, yeah, really like a typical good girl, very um, avoidant of conflict, very like a follower of the rules. Yeah, kind of often like worked like a dog and kind of treated a bit like a doormat is what I grew up seeing with my mum. But my dad is like the opposite, rebellious, bullish, doesn't really give a F what anyone thinks. And I think, well, I can see in my own personality, I've inherited both. So
Mm.
I've got both these traits in me, like this kind of rebel and this class consciousness and this sort of like stick it to the man. And then I've got this like good girl conditioning of like, oh, but that's really frightening. Don't rock the boat, conform. And I just think a lot of my journey has been working with these two energies in my being. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I recently, just last week, had my star chart done for the first time. And it showed exactly that as well. It was incredible. It sort of showed I had like Libra rising, which is ruled by Venus. So that's all very kind of like good girl and nurturing and loving. but then it's directly opposite in Aries moon, which is ruled by Mars. So that's very like rebellious and independent and kind of positively destructive. And so yes, that's kind of my makeup, I would say.
That's amazing. I mean, there is so much in here already, isn't it? And it's fascinating how we are shaped by our family and the impact on it, on us, and not just the conditioning, but really, inherited energies and what we see around us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely, absolutely. And so yeah, so then I was sort of thinking about my life story, and I had this very rebellious period in my teen years. So I think, so yeah, so there's this sort of pressure to achieve and pressure to sort of be a certain way. And then there's sort of my rebelliousness or my sort of, yeah. And I hit puberty and I had this very big rebellious stage. Like, oh my God, it was messy. It was really messy. And and I think at a certain point I kind of I frightened myself, you know. There was because it was immature and reactive, and I didn't have the skills or tools. It was just sort of really innate fire energy, um, you know, that I frightened myself. So then there was this like reaction to that of like what I call my good girl era, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Which probably I think I was really rebellious maybe 15, 16, and then when I hit college I like was lucky to get into college and all of that because of this rebellious era of lots of, well, yeah, alcohol, drugs, blah blah blah. Then I thought, God, I've really got to, like that's dangerous. I've got to put that away, and I've got to be a good girl, and I've got to get into uni, and I've got to. So then I entered this like good girl era, where I worked very hard to achieve kind of success. Like I was then A type, you know, A grades, first class degree, and there was this sense of like, I think like trying to redeem myself from this kind of very chaotic rebellion in my teens. Um, and that lasted through maybe 10 years to my late 20s. And I just sort of climbed the corporate, or not corporate actually, I trained in human rights law. I was going to be a lawyer. That in the end I worked in UK government, and then I went into kind of social work, but it was kind of a kind of career ladder until my late 20s, when it all came to a head in a big burnout. Yeah, that's the next bit.
God, there is. I'm laughing because I could, I've got a similar story. Going like being, going in my late teenage years into this, in my case, moving to London and completely going AWOL.
Mm-hmm.
And it was messy as well, very, very messy. For a few years, and then similar to you, kind of being good girl and really going into social care, and staying for almost 20 years in social care and really kind of working and giving back, almost as if in response to the earlier years. Yeah, it's so interesting because I've spoken with many women, maybe not so many, but quite a good number of women who went through a very similar kind of thing, and those two sides that you are talking about. I find it really fascinating, the influences from our families, from our parents, and the society itself. Earlier when we were talking about women, and, that women actually respond differently to men. And, that's an added kind of challenge, who you need to be as a woman or as a girl within today's society. There's so much pressure in here. So how did you end up doing what you're doing now? If you started with being a lawyer and then going into the social care, and so at which point that transition took place?
Yeah. So we'll just so that's like one arc of my story, and it ends with this big burnout. So we'll just come back a few years.
Mm,
Alongside that, in my early 20s, I found Buddhism. So I
okay.
had a horrible relationship breakup. I booked a last minute flight to Morocco. I traveled around Morocco. I think I might have read Eat, Pray, Love. I met a couple of women who'd just come back from an ashram in India. And I got home and I Googled meditation in Norwich, thinking, God, I need something to help me, cope. Because I was already feeling stressed, already feeling, I was obviously clearly already quite struggling, looking for something to help. And the Buddhist center came up. Just very lucky. I went along and I was like, oh my God, finally someone's telling the truth about the world. These people are so honest about their experience. And it did feel like something like truly radical, so like previously I thought I was going to be a human rights lawyer, work for the UN. I got totally disillusioned. Went into work for UK government, got totally disillusioned. Worked for big aid agencies, totally disillusioned. That's how I ended up working in frontline social work, was because I thought these big pillars of our kind of society were the answer, and they just weren't, and then finding Buddhism, I felt, God, this is actually something that's truly radical. So then, you learn to meditate. But even then, like looking back now, I can see I was still in my like good girl era. So I then tried to become a really good Buddhist, and I see this a lot now in retrospect, like, being a good girl in a spiritual environment can look a lot like being kind of spiritually developed. You're compassionate, you forgive easily, you extend yourself for others, you prioritize other people's needs. Looks a lot like being really spiritually developed, but actually it's just good girl conditioning, trying to stay safe, not feeling okay to be the full range of who you are. Yeah. So I was watching this good girl era of Buddhism, and then practicing meditation, becoming more aware of who I actually am, the dissonance between who I was sort of presenting to the world and who I actually was became more and more apparent. I became more and more in touch with how exhausted I was, or how I wasn't being honest in interactions with people, or where I would hold myself back from speaking up. And the sort of persona and the real me became more and more kind of obvious to me. And then it all came together in this big burnout. I was about 28, and and I really feel like I've done a lot of work and reflection around burnout, but I think a lot of it comes from this sense of like when you're trying to be someone you're not, which is talking about, like this idea, like, and you're trying to live a life or live in a way that you think you should, but is not actually shaped for you. It's a bit off, I always think of it like it's a bit off the peg. We're given these off the peg options, but they don't fit us, and really we need a bespoke shaped life. And I think burnout often comes from this place of like trying to live a life that's not quite the right fit, or trying to be someone who you're not, who you aren't truly. And so anyway, I'll just finish how I ended up with. So in the process of my recovery from burnout, I did a yoga for mental health course. And it was the first time that I really, even after I would probably been practicing Buddhism for 5 years by that point, 5 or 6 years. But that yoga for mental health course was the first time I really saw or really experienced in my body the connection between body mind. Actually, the way I move my body, or the way I inhabit my body, shapes my mind. That like actually mind and body aren't separate. And I think until that point, the Buddhism I'd been practicing had been a bit cerebral, or a bit mind kind of, you sit on a cushion and you meditate, rather than like, oh no, actually the way you move your body, the way you are in your body, is also the way in which your mind is taking shape. And so this yoga for mental health course was a big like light bulb moment around that for me. And so then for the last decade, I've been just deepening that exploration around mind-body connection, burnout, women's conditioning.
That's fascinating. And I a couple of things that come to my mind, like experiencing burnout, such a big thing at the age of 28. it's huge. It's like, oh my God, you're still really young and you're hitting burnout, and the way that you live your life is not aligned with who you are and what you need. That's a big thing because I mean, I've experienced burnout myself, and I in social care, and I've seen my partner. We met when we were working together in a crisis center in London. So, I've watched my partner hitting burnout. I've witnessed his sister and her husband and the family, because they all are social workers or were trained as social workers or mental health workers. And it's so prevalent, but it was a bit later, not in the 20s. It was more like, mid 30s going towards the 40, but 28 is very, very young. Very young.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've always been slightly precocious or something. I think I do live at a sort of, yeah, I'm slightly accelerated or something, or I don't know. Sometimes you're a bit of an old soul in a body, and but I remember being 27 and asking to reduce my hours at work, because I can talk about this later, but really all my life I've been really like, I don't want to waste my time here. Like I've been and that's really, I realized recently the heart of my work is around women and time and the way we're using our time. But I asked to reduce my hours because I would rather at 27 have less money and more quality of life. And I had other things I wanted to prioritize, like my Buddhist practice, like my creativity. And I remember that being met with just like complete, like, you don't reduce your hours in your 20s. Like, this is the point where you're meant to be building your career. You're meant to, be overextending yourself, staying late, taking on extra projects. You don't, at that point, that's something you do when you're like in your 50s, you reduce your hours. And at that point, I did just feel like, I'm not prepared to live by the same standards or rules, or that, again, that sort of part of me that's a bit more rebellious or a bit more independent just was like, no. And then I had this burnout, and yeah, I mean, since then, really, that was a decade ago nearly, which is incredible. But I've just been, exploring those themes really, and sort of really exploring, why I think women do burn out much more than men. Why is that? And again, this class consciousness or kind of systemic critique is very important to me. Like, because I think one thing I can see happening a lot in the coaching world or in the wellness world is everything's treated very individualistically.
Yeah.
And what happens is the woman is blamed, or there's something it's like situated upon her that she is somehow, not, you're not able to cope, or needs more resilience, or needs more self-confidence. It's very individualistic, and actually, we live in a very unjust society. We live, in patriarchal, capitalist culture, and that impacts women much more than men. Have a lot more burden placed upon them, a lot more, they experience a lot more stress because of the way in which they are situated within that hierarchy,
I mean, there is so much in here, and I so agree with you. And it's like, we in the training that I run, we talk a lot about this, and so often, the conversations that we have like are around like, oh my God, yes, like when you name it and you actually name it and show it for what it is, you realize how mad it all is. Because really, in reality, what you think about when you think about our Western society, how women were fighting for equal rights, those rights are not equal. When it comes down to payment and other things, they're not equal. But when you think about this, women used to look after the home, and that's full-time job. Then women were allowed to work, and they got some more work, but they still were, told that they had to run the home. So
Yeah.
in reality, really, most women have got two jobs. I know that I'm not saying that men don't contribute, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that for men, it hasn't changed so much. They still used to go out to work and come back, and the other stuff was done by a woman. These days, a woman might go to work, but she comes back and she's expected to do what she used to do, which is take care of the house.
Yeah.
And that's impossible. It's like even in my own home, I said to my partner, it's like I can't do everything. I can't work full time and do everything. It's like we either do this or we do that. And it has to be shared, because I simply haven't got enough time
Yeah.
and energy to do all of that. And when you think about this, it's the same whether you've got children or you don't have children. There are those roles within the household, and you share them between household members, but it's still on a woman, because that's our conditioning in a sense.
Absolutely.
We are being told that to be successful as a woman, you have to be able to do all of it and look really pretty as you are doing it.
Exactly.
And as you said, if you're not doing it, there's something wrong with you,
Yes.
not with the system and the dynamic and how it's all structured. Yeah, it's really, really challenging. I mean, I know that you work with women quite a lot, and I wonder, if I could ask you, what are the kind of things that come up for your clients? What are the kind of, things that women are struggling, especially if they are ambitious and, as you said, overextended?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I work exclusively with women. I
Mm.
work with women, and and I work with, yeah, they tend to be, women similar to myself, so ambitious and driven, and wanting to create something that has a positive impact on the world. And at the same time, they're, yeah, overextended, depleted, under resourced, and
Mm.
blaming themselves. Yeah, so exactly that, like you say, there's this sort of self blame, and that's just incredibly reinforced in our culture. Yeah, and you get these things like, and I'm not saying all of these things are, you know, wrong,
Mm.
but you get productivity hacks, and you get time management,
Yeah.
and they're sort of like, yes, okay, they have a place, but it's a bit like a band-aid over a gaping wound. It's like, actually, women don't need more time management.
And how to be able to do more in the time that you have even more.
Exactly, exactly. What women really, really need is a real sense of their own value, a sense of their deep worthiness, like really, like that they are the center of their own lives, and that they are able to say yes and no to the commitments according to whether they innately want to do them or not, to say no without feeling guilty, um, to carve out time for what they really want to do or what they really need. That's not a diarising issue. That is a deeply, deeply countercultural and like somatically deconditioning programming issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hear you. I mean, it's like I've been through that process myself. And it's, over the year, I've done a lot of self-development work over the last 30 years. I mean, I love trainings, I love learning. And it's always been like, let's do it in a more productive way. And the last few years, I suddenly realized it's like, well, actually, I don't want to be able to do more in the little time that I have. It's this constant, there is almost like a promise that if you only try, and it's this, it comes with capitalism, it comes with Western kind of way of thinking. It's like, it's possible for you to have everything. If only you can learn better skills, then you can do it. So keep learning. And there is this promise of, you just have to keep learning. You just have to keep doing it better. You just have to, then it's possible. And
Yeah.
it's never ending
Yeah. Yeah. It's never.
hustle. isn't it? It's like it works for a bit and then something happens, you don't feel well, or your loved one is ill, or something else comes up, and it's just, and I
Yeah,
think what those models don't take into consideration is the lived experience of a human being living their life with all the challenges that the life brings on a daily basis.
yeah, totally. So let me go back to that question, like how it shows up with the women that I work with, because it shows up in so many different ways, you know. So let me just think of a few examples. Oh God, I have this totally gorgeous, all my clients are gorgeous. But one woman, she was like a really high flying exec, you know, in a coaching business, like a big business, and she was one of the top execs. And she had, you know, one of the things is I think we've all worked really hard to get to where we've got to, and so we've got this in us that we have to work hard all the time. But she was, you know, she was high flying, but she was still being given the grunt work, you know, things that other people didn't want to do got passed to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of felt obliged to take it on, so she would end up doing this sort of grunt work that she wasn't really, was way below her caliber of what she should be using her time for. Yeah, but she didn't feel comfortable saying no. She didn't want to appear to be a bitch, you know, or to be, you know, she was concerned about the way that people would receive her. She was taking on stuff at work she didn't really want to do, working the hours that other people didn't want to work. In meetings, she would have a young men speak over her. Yeah.
Mm.
And then she would come home and she had an adult child still living with her, and she was still doing their laundry and
Mm.
still cleaning the house. And really she came to me just feeling like she'd lost herself in the mix
Mm.
of all of that. She'd built this amazing career. It looked great from the outside, but she was coming home exhausted. She was like vegging out with like Netflix and a glass of wine each night. And she still felt like Cinderella of her own life, you know? She didn't feel like the central character of her own life. And she was always, you know, I think that thing of like, it's never ending. You know, we've got this promise that if we just work hard enough, at a certain point, we're going to arrive at a place, and then suddenly we'll get the lifestyle that we want. Then
Yeah.
suddenly we'll be able to relax. Then suddenly, and I'm just, that point will never arrive. It is never given to you. You have to take it, and you can take it today. Yeah. So that's sort
Mm.
of what I do with the women. So with her, the first thing we always start with is just reconnecting with the body, you know? So there's loads going on in that situation. Okay. So there's, at the root of it all is like this inherent sense that we're worth less than men. Yeah. So like this worthlessness, we're worth less, which is what the patriarchal capitalist society says. Yeah. So we've all got that wound, like that we're not as worthy, that we're not okay as we are. So then we have to over effort, over strive. That's where all the, I think the perfectionism comes in, then imposter syndrome comes in, because I think women, we don't have that deep, we're not given from a young age that deep sense of you're fine just as you are. You don't need to be something different. Like, who are you? Grow into that fullness. We're told, no, you need to be this particular shape, and you need to, it's a fact that you need to work harder to get the same respect, and you're going to need to put in more hours to achieve the same, you know, you're going to be paid less. And so there's objective things in there, right? And then that adds up to confidence to not set boundaries, or feeling like you need to please other people, or you know, that sort of the good girl conditioning that comes in. And then suddenly your diary is full with things you don't want to be doing, and you see it sort of snowballs like that. And then you end up in this incredibly dysregulated, stressed place, and you can't, from that place you can't even think straight. You can't even look at your life and think what needs to change. You're just so kind of in it and on the hamster wheel that it takes like falling off, getting sick, or some moment where you think, I am done with this. Something happens and you think life is too short. I had a client recently, she had a car crash, and in the night after the car crash, she was thinking through all the things that could have happened, her kids growing up without her, blah, blah. And she realized, I did not think about my career once in that moment. And yet my job, she's an entrepreneur, I spend most of my time working, earning, you know, thinking that I have to work to be valuable, to be, and in the moment where it really mattered, it was the last thing I thought of. And she was like, Erika, life is too short. Like, I want to take back my life today, you know? And so that's what I really help women do, is I think it's like we start with returning to the body. We've just got to settle that nervous system. We've got to get you back in touch with how you're actually doing, which might be you are knackered, yeah? Then we need to start learning, okay, what are we going to say no to? There are things, even in the busiest schedule, what are the things that are like you're doing because you feel obliged, because you feel like you should? What are the times, what are the things you're spending way more effort on than actually is needed? You know, like what are you perfecting when actually a male colleague or a male entrepreneur would just put out as it is, you know, like this sort of sense that we have to be 100% all the time or amazing all the time. Or like, what support do you need? Like who, you know, you've got to drop the ball somewhere. Like you say, I think women are given this myth, the superwoman myth. Like
Yeah.
you need to be superwoman, and we are not superwomen. We are not. And it's like, you cannot do it all. Let's just start by being very honest about that. And that there are some things that you really care about that you will prioritize. And the rest, do you know what? You're going to half-ass it and consciously neglect. You know, I love that idea. I'm just consciously neglecting that. The house is not going to be immaculate. You know, I'm not going to do the PTA meetings. I'm going to do these few things really well. And the rest I'm giving 40% to, because that's the way it is.
Yeah. And that's realistic, isn't it? It's you can't do it all. There isn't enough time. There isn't enough energy.
And that is how men are operating all the time. You know, I'm speaking generally, but a lot of men, they're just doing that unconsciously. They're not even having to think about it. They just think these are the things that are important to me. They're not even registering the rest, you know? Whereas women, we've been trained to take on too much, and whether that's emotional labor at home, whether it's domestic labor, whether it's, overextending ourselves, putting in more effort in the office, or, you know, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and that might be thinking we have to be available all the time for our clients, thinking we have to be everything to our clients, or, you know, so again, it's the sense of taking on far too much and feeling guilty when we don't.
I mean, one of the things, I love what you're just saying, you know, I think in a very similar way. And one of the things that I notice, and you might relate to it, is that for women, what I notice with women, it's that many of us need permission from another woman to actually say, oh, I'm allowed to actually do that. I'm allowed to say no. I'm allowed to acknowledge what I'm feeling, even if everybody around me is saying that I shouldn't, or it's not right, or I should do it differently. I'm actually allowed. I can, you know, I've got permission from somebody else, and I can give myself permission to do that. That's really liberating, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that is what it's like, honesty. Like when, and that you doing that, you will be the permission for another woman, you know. That's so this is, I just want to make this point because it's really important to me, like so we live in these unjust systems, okay? So like that, we live in patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. So we live in these unjust systems, and some of, you know, like, so for example, not being paid the same amount as men is like a structural external issue, yeah? But then what happens is we internalize that. So, you know, we grow up in this kind of, it's like the sea we're swimming in all the time. It becomes part of us, yeah? And we sort of absorb these rules into our being and into our bodies. So this is why it's so important, if you're working with a coach, if you're working with a therapist, that they do have a sense of like the systems that we're in.
Yes.
Otherwise, you are going to be made the problem. You are going to, it's like this pathologizing approach, you know, or how do we fix you so you can function in this awful system more adequately, but, you know, become a better cog in the wheel almost. But actually what we're doing is we're internalizing culture. So I'm obsessed with this, and really it's like, So I call what I do liberatory somatics or liberatory embodiment. Yeah. So it's a sense of like, so where does culture actually exist, or where does let's call it culture as in terms of the way in which we think we should behave. Yeah. Where does it actually exist? Well, it exists through our bodies, you know? So it exists in us, the way we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to our own bodies, the way we relate to other bodies. Yeah. So it exists through us and it's replicated through us. Yeah. So whether, you know, as a woman, a really great example is like the amount of space we feel able to take up. Yeah. So the opposite of man spreading, woman minimizing. Yeah. So crossing our legs, making ourselves small. That's just a really tangible visual of how oppressive culture influences individuals, and it comes through our bodies and the way we inhabit our bodies, relate to our bodies, and how we relate to other bodies. Yeah. And so that's why it's so exciting to work with the body and embodiment, because it's like, as you change your own embodiment, as you liberate yourselves from these internal rules, you know, so like no one's standing over you anymore telling you need to give 100%, but something in you has internalized that, and means that you constantly overwork and over effort, or you're putting in more than you need to get a job done. There's no external force anymore, but it's internalized. Yeah. But as you begin to transform that, as you begin to learn to rest back, as you begin to learn to like do 40% effort, or, you know, what you're doing is changing culture. That makes me so excited, because it's like, just like you said about, you know, you need permission from another woman, but in your recalibrating of your own nervous system, in you learning to take up more space, in you learning to rest, what you're doing is you're like creating a bit more of that culture, which then like unconsciously or consciously permissions another woman to do the same. And then that's how a more healthy culture gets made. Yeah. So it's like, where it's that sense of like, as we undo our own conditioning to live more in line with who we really are, to put ourselves and our needs at the center, and sort of create a lifestyle and a working environment that supports us to be our full selves. What we're doing is also creating a culture that will enable other women to do the same, you know? That is why I do this work, because it just feels so exciting to me. Like, I can't think of something more that I would want to serve than that.
I can really relate to that. I really hear what you are saying. And you know, within the training certifications that I run, it's watching women, how they arrive at the beginning, and then as we are together for the 9 or 10 months, you know, how they change over time and what they say at the end. And you know, I have to acknowledge that I've changed because of being part of those relationships, of those groups, that it's done something for me that hasn't happened before in the past. Because it hasn't been, I mean, I've been part of women's circles, and I've had lots of women's circles and, you know, retreat and groups and stuff like that. But bringing that conscious acknowledgement exactly of what you're just talking about, it's like that systems thinking approach of like, yes, there is a whole person, but actually as a person, I am a woman. And how do I exist as a woman within this society? It cannot be separate. It has to be named. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be taken into account as I am, you know, looking after myself. And the other thing that you were saying in here that I just so resonate with, and it's so lovely hearing you talk about this, it's this rest part. And, you know, when I understand as a woman that everything, absolutely everything in my life, whether private or work, is built on me being able to take care of myself, and rest. And I'm not talking about only as a passive resting and sleep and downtime, but also the active resting of doing stuff that really brings me, that makes me feel joyful and creative and fulfilled. When I really understand and prioritize that, rather than having it at the bottom of my list somewhere, if I get to it at some point, it will be really great, then everything changes. Everything changes. But it's like we know that on a mind level, but we don't feel it, we don't embody it, we don't act as if we understand. Because that's the other thing, I used to think years ago, awareness is everything. Awareness is not everything, because many of us are aware on the shallow first level. In order for it to shift into embodied experience and then change our behavior, we have to go from the surface level into that deeper somatic embodied level. That's when, if we understand it on that level, then the behavior changes as if by itself. But so many of us try to change it on that surface level, and women's magazines are filled with great advice that sounds really amazing, but unless we actually connect with it through our embodied experience, we can't really use it. It's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, isn't it? It's kind of, I'm hoping that will help. I'm hoping I'm going to do this. Maybe this will help. Or, rather than allowing ourselves to be with ourselves and dropping in. And so, I wonder what is your experience around kind of women's circles and women's groups? I'm not sure, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, God, I've got loads to say in response to that. I've just been, um, um, can I just say what I
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
respond
yeah,
and then I'll come to the
yeah.
question around women's groups. So I just want to say in response to that, yeah, there's so many things I could say, but I feel like like we live in this world that separates. This is a big theme that I work with women, because really, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I found myself in the sort of business coaching world, and that's not quite what I do actually. What I really help women do is more like is learning how to put themselves back at the center of their lives and shape a life that really fits them, like a handmade wardrobe, and that's more so, what would that be called? I don't even know, like lifestyle coaching. But often what I find is this separation. You said, like, whether it's at work or at home, and it's like we live in this culture that like divides up time in these like obligatory ways, and you think, okay, well, this is work time, this is home life, but just like you're saying, you are a whole person, you know and it's like it's just a matter of how you are spending your time, and sometimes that's on things to do with your business, and other times it's in your personal life, but they're really not separate. But and so like just what you're saying, like everything rests on your well-being, like everything, like your career, your relationship with those that you love, your the money in your bank account, it all rests upon your well-being, which which yes is about rest, and it's about so much more than rest. So I think one thing I do have a little bit of critique of, maybe, I think rest is a really, really, really important. Like, women are fucking exhausted, and most of them need to rest and learn how to rest. That is, and even if women just did that, it would be amazing. Yeah. And there's also it's then also, like you said, it's like not just resting and kind of learning to receive as well, but then there's also the more kind of, so maybe we'll call that like the more yin, learning to be expand our yin. Yeah, like yielding, resting, learning to receive rather than always be giving. Yeah. But then you've also got the more yang qualities, which are often underdeveloped, yeah, under permissioned, we've not been allowed to really inhabit them, which is like saying no, connecting with our rage, learning what our real desire is and what really turns us on in life. And I'm not just talking sexually, I'm talking like what really turns you on in your life. Like, what do you really love to eat? What do you really love to feel against your body? What do you really love to do? learning to feel that, learning to act on that, rather than waiting to see what other people want, or going like, oh no, I really feel like eating this, I really want to go here, so those are the more yang qualities, or like, no, that wasn't okay, like I'm going to speak up, or I'm ragefully angry about this other thing. So it's just, I sort of feel like sometimes we're told women should rest, and that is so true, and in that sort of yin way. But I also think there's this other part, which is like, be who you really are, feel what you're really feeling, because that is also, like, on a bigger level, restful. Like, I think so much of like the tension and the sort of exhaustion women feel is because part of us is always under reins, always under control, always held back, and that takes up so much effort. I heard this beautiful quote recently. It's attributed to the Buddha, but I'm pretty sure it's not the Buddha. He gets all sorts of quotes attributed to him, but it's a beautiful quote, and it says, tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you actually are. And I really felt that. I really felt like a lot of the tension I feel in my life is when I'm being someone, when I'm not being congruent with actually how I am, who I am. And I think a big part of my journey, and it goes on, like it's not, is allowing myself to be these kind of contradictory parts I spoke about at the beginning. Like, I am filled with light, and I'm also filled with anger. I've got genius in me, and I've got these real liabilities in me. I can be gracious and patient, and I can be tempestuous and temperamental, and so we all, and that's true for all of us. So there's just something as well I want to speak to, which is like, we all contain the Venus and the Mars, or the good girl and the rebel, the part that wants to nourish and grow, and the part that wants to burn shit down. And something that's bigger than rest, or is a bigger encapsulation of the idea of rest, which is just like, I called my business Your Right to Be. And really what I mean by that is like, one, you are valuable and worthy, and you have a right to be here without needing to do anything, prove anything, effort at all. Like, your value is not in what you do, it's in you being here. So your right to be. But I also want to say, like, and it's all right to be who you actually are, which is this imperfect, odd, myriad of contradictions. And the more and more we can permission all of that, the less and less tension we feel, and the more we can know ourselves to think, okay, what's the environment, what's the lifestyle, what's the business model that really serves who I actually am, where I'm not having to like contort myself out of shape to fit into a plant pot container that's not big enough for me, or yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, completely. And it's really weird when there's, this expecting that a woman shouldn't really get angry or feel rage. I mean, it's, when I think about anger, for example, I kind of think like, well, that's just reaction to something being unfair, or somebody breaching your boundaries, or there's some kind of thing that you have to react to. It's actually really useful.
It's information.
Yeah.
It's, and I'm not saying, I'm not permissioning that we act out of that place or harm people, or but often because we feel it's wrong, or there's shame, or we've not been allowed to own that part of ourselves, we can't even feel the sensations of it. And we don't know how to listen to it to tell us, what is the wisdom that's being communicated here? What is this telling me? We just immediately feel like, oh, bad, shouldn't be feeling that, should do something different, and then all that information is lost, and it's really exhausting. There's part of you that's holding that all down, that's like, that there's a tension there in not allowing it, and there's this again, this idea of, oh, I'm not allowed to be who I am, I'm not allowed to feel how
I'm bad for feeling this, or I'm gonna be punished, or judged. And in a sense, we need yes, I completely agree with you. I mean, it cannot be any other way. We are whole being and we are imperfect, and we do need the more feminine qualities, the more masculine qualities. And I mean, I personally, I don't want to go into here, but I have got this thing about the goddess
Yes,
movement, and
I could.
I'm like, oh God, no. And it's quite funny because I am just creating some retreats with somebody else that I'm collaborating with. And I just said to her, it's like, but we definitely we're gonna have some circles to connect. But I said, like, we are definitely not doing it wear all white clothes and come in this really beautiful. I was like, 'cause I can't stand that.
I really agree.
It's not that there isn't a space for it. I just think that it's again, it's what you were just talking about, that yin and yang, or that feminine and masculine. It's like it tips it over again into somehow just one-sided way of connecting with it, rather than being a whole being within the environment, living, breathing, showing up and connecting. And
Yeah,
it just loses, for me, it kind of loses the real nature of humanity.
yeah, I really agree, and I will just follow you in the thread of I'm a bit reactive to the goddess thing, and also like the divine feminine. So at in the way that I see it being kind of co-opted sometimes in our coaching industry or wellness industry, and I think you asked earlier about my experience of women's groups. I've been really blessed. I found a Buddhist community when I was in my early 20s full of wise older women, so some of my best friends are like in their 70s, and we're really lacking that in our current culture. Like, I have this intergenerational relationships with really deeply wise women who are incredibly grounded in the reality of practical day to day and have a very developed spiritual practice, but um it's not white and flowery, and and there is a place for that. But I think the main issue I see for me in this women's circles world at the moment is just the lack of cultural critique, systemic awareness raising, like that it exists within a bit of a bubble.
Yes.
And I, as someone who has a very strong political background, as someone who's got that in my DNA almost, and is very politically active, I sort of think I get these, Instagram posts of divine feminine, da, 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 and yet they never are talking about injustices in the world. They're never talking about, I don't know, Gaza, and the current genocide happening in Gaza. They're not talking about, I don't know, the climate crisis, or any kind of systemic evaluation. And one, that's incredibly dangerous for the women taking part, because what it does is locate the problem in them rather than within a system. So then I don't know about you, it self-help just becomes, or like rest becomes another thing on the to-do list, or another way we've got to perfect ourselves, or another thing that we've got to do individually to kind of compensate it. But this individual approach is very dangerous. And two, I just think, does the divine feminine not have anything to say about the current political environment? So the divine feminine, again, it's kind of echoing, like that women's the sphere of women is for the private. That whole public private separation, and like,
Oh yeah.
how
Yeah.
hard feminists have worked to separate that. And yet sometimes the sort of divine feminine goddess work, it's all kept very personal and private, and about your little life and I'm not saying those are like little lives aren't important, but it's like very personal, and it's in the private sphere. And I think the divine feminine is rageful and ready to like change society and culture, and should show up in our politics, and should show up in our um social movements and should show up in our economics, you know? And so there's like,
Yeah,
come
yeah.
on, women. Like, and I think there are lots and lots of beautiful practitioners that are bridging that gap. And so I don't want to throw shade on anyone, but for me personally, with my preferences and thoughts, that's where what I see is missing. And I can't really be in those spaces if there isn't awareness and a consciousness raising of wider systemic issues. Just
Yeah.
kind of doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with that, and that might be because I'm Polish, and I I moved to UK when I was 18, and working in London and Kent with the poorest families, and I sometimes find that it's not just the divine feminine, it's the coaching world sometimes and the wellness world that is kind of in this bubble that is actually sometimes. I understand where the intention is coming from, wanting to heal, wanting to create safe spaces, but sometimes it's disconnected from the reality of many people's lives, and that can be a real challenge, definitely. It's like when I go back home, to Poland, and with everything that is happening in Ukraine, it's a very different yeah, it's I'm exposed to different kind of narratives within the community and what's been happening in there, and it's yeah, I cannot definitely separate it. Like I think about how I structured my own business to be able to help my parents who live in a different country, next to the war country, that's been really impacted, and how it's always part of my consciousness. It's always here because that is the reality. And no matter of, dressing in white and doing nice goddess stuff is going to change that. It's like it has to be rooted with my 2 feet on the ground, and needs to be part of it.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of the time, Erika. I absolutely loved chatting with you. I'm sure we could be here for a very long time, continue talking. And, I hope we will get a chance to come back and talk a little bit more at some point. Um, if there was one thing that you could share with women, because I know that a lot of my listeners are women, because majority of my work is with women and female practitioners. If there was one kind of pearl of wisdom or something that you'd like to share with our female listeners, what would it be?
Well, I would say, yeah. What I want to whisper into all the women's ears that I see is like, you're just fine just as you are. Like, you are not the problem to be fixed. Yeah. So
Mm,
I would say it's so easy to get co-opted into that narrative, even in the coaching world, healing world, that you are somehow the problem to be fixed. And I would say you are not the problem to be fixed. Culture is the problem to be fixed. And to focus more on really returning to yourself and permissioning yourself to be who you are, just as you are right now, completely imperfect, full of eccentricities, contradictions. Focus more on returning to that, and then thinking, on the basis of that, how can I shape my life to support me to be as at ease as I can? Where in my life am I not allowed to be just as I am? And what do I need to do to curate that or shape that or change that so I can be just more who I am in more areas of my life? Yeah. So
mm,
focus on changing you, more focus on getting to know the full you, and then thinking, okay, what does this creature, this plant, I often use those as plant metaphors, but like, if you were a plant, what conditions does this particular plant, given what it is, need to really thrive and grow as full and as abundant as you can? Because given the right conditions, you can't not blossom. It's inevitable. So yeah, that's what I would say.
oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Erika. Oh, okay. So if anybody wanted to find out more about your work, how can they find you?
Yeah, so my website is yourrighttobe.com. So yeah, yourrighttobe.com. And then you could find me Facebook. If you just put in my name, I'll come up. I do more on my personal page than my business one. And on Instagram, it's Your Right to Be.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, Erika, for taking time to chat with me. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, you too. And yeah, let's do it again.